Chapter 13. How stupid had he been to ride for so long wounded and so far south, only breaking the ride for the horse's sake. A post-horse would have been more sensible, but the chestnut steed, Agnella, was his last link to Mario. Where was he? He remembered a crumbling, dingy suburb, and then, rising out of it, a once majestic yellow stone arch, an erstwhile gateway that pierced a formerly magnificent city's walls. Ezio's impulse had been to rejoin Machiavelli, to right the wrong he had committed by not making sure that Rodrigo Borgia was dead. But by God, he was tired. He lay back on the pallet he found himself on. He could smell the dry straw, its odour carrying with it a hint of cow dung. Where was he? An image of Caterina came suddenly and strongly into his mind. He must free her. They had to be together at last. But perhaps he should also free himself from her, though part of his heart told him that this was not what he really wanted. How could he trust her? How could a simple man ever understand the subtle labyrinths of a woman's mind? Alas, the torture of love didn't seem to get any less acute with age. Was she using him? Ezio had always maintained an inner room within his heart, a sanctum sanctorum that was kept locked, even to his most intimate friends, his mother, who knew of it and respected it, his sister, and his late brothers and father. Had Caterina broken in? He hadn't been able to prevent the killing of his father and brothers, and by Christ and the cross he had done his best to protect Maria and Claudia. Caterina could look after herself. She was a book that kept its covers closed, and yet, how he longed to read it. I love you, his heart cried out to Caterina in spite of himself. The woman of his dreams at last, this late in life. But his duty, he told himself, came first, and Caterina never truly showed her cards. Her enigmatic brown eyes, her smile, the way she could twist him round her long, expert fingers, the closeness. But also the keen silence of her hair, which always smelled of vanilla and roses. How could he ever trust her, even when he laid his head on her breast after they had made passionate love, and wanted so much to feel secure? No, the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood. The Brotherhood. His mission and his destiny. I am dead, Ezio said to himself. I am already dead inside. But I will finish what I have to do. The dream dissolved, and his eyelids flickered open, revealing a view of an ample but elderly cleavage descending on him, the chemise the woman was wearing parting like the Red Sea. Ezio sat up rapidly. His wound was properly dressed now, and the pain was so dull as to be almost negligible. As his eyes focused, they took in a small room with walls of rough-hewn stone. Calico curtains were drawn across the small windows, and in a corner an iron stove burned, the embers from its open door giving the place its only light. The door was shut, but whoever was with him in the room lit the stump of a candle. A middle-aged woman who looked like a peasant knelt beside him, just within the frame of his vision. Her face was kindly as she tended to his wound, rearranging the poultice and bandage. It was sore. Ezio winced in pain. "Calmatevi," said the woman, The pain will end soon. Where's my horse? Where's Campione? Safe, resting. God knows she deserves it. She was bleeding from the mouth. A good horse like that? What were you doing to her? The woman put down the bowl of water she was holding and stood. Where am I? In Rome, my dear. Messer Machiavelli found you fainting in your saddle, your horse frothing, and brought you both here. Don't worry, he's paid me and my husband well to look after you both. And a few more coins for our discretion. But you know Messer Machiavelli. Cross him at your peril. Anyway, we've done this kind of job for your organization before. Did he leave any message? Oh, yes. You're to meet him as soon as you're fit at the mausoleum of Augustus. Know where that is? It's one of the ruins, isn't it? Dead right. Not that it's much less of a ruin than most of this awful city nowadays. To think it was once the centre of the world. Look at it now. Smaller than Florence, half the size of Venice. But we do have one boast, she cackled. And that is? Only 50,000 poor souls live in this shanty town of a city that once was proud to call itself Rome, and 7,000 of them are prostitutes. That's got to be a record. She cackled some more. No wonder everyone's riddled with the new disease. Don't sleep with anyone here, she added, if you don't want to fall apart with the pox. Even cardinals have it, and they say the Pope himself and his son are sufferers. Ezio remembered Rome as if in a dream. A bizarre place now, whose ancient rotting walls had been designed to encompass a population of 1 million. Now most of the area was given over to peasant farming. He remembered, too, the ruined wasteland of what had once been the great forum in ancient times, but where sheep and goats now grazed. People stole the ancient carved marble and porphyry stones which lay higgledy-piggledy in the grass to build pigsties or to grind down for lime. And out of the desolation of slums and crooked, filthy streets, the great new buildings of Popes Sixtus IV and Alexander VI rose obscenely, like wedding cakes on a table where there was nothing else to eat but stale bread. The aggrandizement of the Church was confirmed, back at last from the papal exile at Avignon. The Pope, the leading figure in the international world, outclassing not only kings, but the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian himself, had his seat in Rome once more. Hadn't it been Pope Alexander VI who divided, in his great judgment, the southern continent of the New Americas between the colonizing countries of Portugal and Spain in the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494? It was the same year the new disease broke out in Naples in Italy. They called it the French disease, Morbus Gallicus, but everyone knew it had come back from the New World with Columbus's Genoese sailors. It was an unpleasant affliction. People's faces and bodies bubbled up in pustules and boils, and their faces were often pressed out of all recognizable shape in the last stages. Here in Rome, the poor made do on barley and bacon, when they could get bacon, and the dirty streets harboured typhus, cholera, and the Black Death. As for the citizens, on the one hand they were the ostentatiously rich, whilst the majority looked like cowherds and lived just as badly. What a contrast to the gilded opulence of the Vatican! The great city of Rome had become a rubbish heap of history. Along the filthy alleys that passed for streets, in which feral dogs and wolves now roamed, Ezio remembered churches which today were falling apart, rotting, deserted palaces that reminded him of the probable wreck of his own family seat in Florence. I must get up. I must find Messer Machiavelli, said Ezio, urgently flinging the visions from his mind. All in good time, replied his nurse. He left you a new suit of clothes. Put them on when you're ready. Ezio stood, but as he did so his head swam. He shook himself to clear it, then donned the suit Machiavelli had left him. It was new and made of linen, with a hood of soft wool that had a peak like an eagle's beak. There were strong, soft gloves and boots of Spanish leather. He dressed himself, fighting the pain the effort caused him, and when he was done, the woman guided him to a balcony. Ezio realized then that he had not been in some shrunken hovel, but in the remains of what had once been a great palace. They must have been on the Piano Nobile. He drew in his breath as he looked at the desolate wreck of the city spread out below him. A rat scuttled boldly over his feet. He kicked it away. Ah, Roma, he said ironically. What's left of it, the woman repeated, cackling again. Thank you, Madonna. To whom do I owe? I am the Contessa Margherita degli Campi, she said, and in the dim light Ezio could see at last the fine lines of a once beautiful face. Or what's left of her? Contessa, Ezio said, trying to keep the sadness out of his voice as he bowed. The mausoleo is over there, she replied, smiling and pointing. That is where you are to meet. I can't see it. In that direction. Unfortunately, you cannot see it from my palazzo. Ezio squinted into the dark. What about from the tower of that church? She looked at him. Santo Stefano's? Yes, but it's a ruin. The stairs to the tower have collapsed. Ezio braced himself. He needed to get to his meeting place as safely and as quickly as possible. He did not want to be delayed by the beggars, tarts and muggers who infested the streets by day and night. That shouldn't be a problem, he told the woman. Vi ringrazio di tutto quello che avete fatto per me, buona contessa. Addio. You're more than welcome, she replied with a wry smile. But are you sure you're fit enough to go so soon? I think you should see a doctor. I'd recommend one, but I can't afford them any more. I've cleaned and dressed your wound, but I am no expert. The Templars won't wait, and nor can I, he replied. Thank you again, and goodbye. Go with God. He leapt from the balcony down to the street, wincing at the impact, and darted across the square, which was dominated by the disintegrating palace, in the direction of the church. Twice he lost sight of the tower and had to double back. 3 times he was accosted by leprous beggars, and once confronted by a wolf, which slunk off down an alley with what may have been a dead child between its jaws. At last he was in the open space before the church. It was boarded up, and the limestone saints that adorned its portal were deformed by neglect. He didn't know whether he could trust the rotten stonework, but there was nothing for it. He had to climb. He managed it, though he lost his footing on several occasions, and once his feet fell free over an embrasure that collapsed beneath them, leaving him hanging by the tips of his fingers. He was still a strong man despite his injuries, and he managed to haul himself up and out of danger until at last he was on top of the tower that was perched on its lead roof. The dome of the mausoleum glinted dully in the moonlight several blocks away. He'd go there now and wait for Machiavelli to arrive. He adjusted his hidden blade, sword, and dagger, and was about to make a leap of faith down to a hay wain parked in the square below, when his wound caused him to double up in pain. The Contessa dressed my shoulder well, but she was right. I must see a doctor, he said to himself. Painfully, he clambered down the tower to the street. He had no idea where to find a medical, So he made his way to an inn, where he obtained directions in exchange for a couple of ducats, which also bought him a beaker of filthy sanguineus, which assuaged his pain somewhat. It was late by the time he reached the doctor's surgery. He had to knock several times, and hard, before there was a muffled response from within. Then the door opened a crack to reveal a fat, bearded man of about 60, wearing thick eyeglasses. He looked the worse for wear. Ezio could smell drink on his breath, and one of his eyes seemed larger than the other. "What do you want?" said the man. "Are you Dottore Antonio?" "And if I am?" "I need your help." "It's late," said the doctor, but his gaze had wandered to the wound on Ezio's shoulder, and his eyes became cautiously more sympathetic. "It'll cost extra." "I am not in a position to argue." "Good. Come in." The doctor unchained his door and stood aside. Ezio staggered gratefully into a hallway whose beams were hung with a collection of copper pots and glass phials, dried bats and lizards, mice and snakes. The doctor ushered him through to an inner room containing a huge desk, untidily covered with papers, a narrow bed in one corner, a cupboard whose open doors revealed more files, and a leather case also open, containing a selection of scalpels and miniature saws. The doctor followed Ezio's eyes and barked out a short laugh. "We Medici are just jumped-up mechanics," he said. "Lie down on the bed and I'll have a look. Before you do, it's 3 ducats, in advance." Ezio handed over the money. The doctor undressed the wound and pushed and shoved until Ezio virtually passed out with the pain. "Hold still," the doctor grumbled. He poked around some more, poured some stinging liquid from a flask over the wound, dabbed at it with a cotton wad, produced some clean bandages, and bound it firmly once more. "Someone your age cannot recover from a wound like this with medicine." The doctor rummaged about in his cupboard and produced a phial of treacly-looking stuff. "But here's something to dull the pain. Don't drink it all at once. It's another 3 ducats, by the way. And don't worry, you'll heal over time." "Grazie, dottore." 4 out of 5 doctors would have suggested leeches, but they haven't proven effective against this sort of wound. What is it? If they weren't so rare, I'd say it was from a gunshot. Come back if you need to, or I can recommend several good colleagues around the city. Do they cost as much as you do? Dr. Antonio sneered. My good sir, you've got off lightly. Ezio stomped out into the street. A light rain had begun to fall, and the streets were already turning muddy. Someone your age, grumbled Ezio. Che sobbalzo. He made his way back to the inn as he'd noticed they had rooms for rent. He'd stay there, eat something, and make his way to the mausoleum in the morning. Then he'd just have to wait for his fellow assassin to show up. Machiavelli might at least have left some kind of rendezvous time with the Contessa. Ezio was aware of Machiavelli's passion for security, though. He'd no doubt turn up at the appointed spot every day at regular intervals. Ezio shouldn't have too long to wait. Ezio picked his way through the wretched streets and alleys, darting back into the darkness of doorways whenever a Borgia patrol, easily recognized by their mulberry and yellow livery, passed by. It was midnight by the time he reached the inn again. He took a swig from the phial of dark liquid. It was good, and hammered on the inn door with the pommel of his sword. Chapter 14. The following day Ezio left the inn early. His wound felt stiff, but the pain was duller and he was better able to use his arm now. Before leaving, he practiced a few strokes with the hidden blade and found he could use it without difficulty, as well as more conventional sword and dagger work. It was just as well he hadn't been shot in the shoulder of his sword arm. Not being sure whether the Borgia and their Templar associates knew that he had escaped the Battle of Monteriggioni with his life, and noting the high number of soldiers armed with guns and dressed in the dark mulberry red and yellow livery of the Borgia, he took a roundabout route to the mausoleum of Augustus, and the sun was high by the time he reached it. There were fewer people about, and after having scouted round, assuring himself that no guards were watching the place, Ezio cautiously approached the building, slipping through a ruined doorway into the gloomy interior. As his eyes accustomed themselves to the darkness, he made out a figure dressed in black, leaning against a stone outcrop, and still as a statue. He glanced to each side to ascertain that there was somewhere to duck behind before it noticed him. But apart from tussocks of grass among the fallen stones of the ancient Roman ruin, there was nothing. He decided on the next best thing, and swiftly but silently started to move towards the deeper darkness of the mausoleum's walls. He was too late. Whoever it was had seen him, probably as soon as he'd entered, framed by the light from the doorway, and moved towards him. As it approached, he recognized the black-suited figure of Machiavelli, who placed a finger on his lips as he came closer. Beckoning him discreetly to follow, Machiavelli made his way into a deeper, darker area of the ancient Roman emperor's tomb, built almost 1.5 millennia earlier. At last he stopped and turned. "Shh," he said, and waiting, listened keenly. "What? Voice down." "Voice very low," admonished Machiavelli, listening still. At last he relaxed. "All right," he continued. "There's no one." "What do you mean?" "Cesare Borgia has eyes everywhere." Machiavelli relaxed a little. "I'm glad to see you here." "But you left me clothes at the Contessa's. She had word to watch for your arrival in Rome." Machiavelli grinned. "Oh, I knew you'd come here. Once you'd assured yourself of the safety of your mother and sister. After all, they are the last of the Auditori family." "I don't like your tone," said Ezio, bridling slightly. Machiavelli allowed himself a thin smile. "This is no time for tact, my dear colleague. I know the guilt you feel about your lost family, even though you are not remotely to blame for that great betrayal." He paused. "News of the attack on Monteriggioni has spread across this city. Some of us were sure that you had died there. I left the clothes with our trusted friend because I knew you better than that you would go and die on us at such a crucial time. Or at any rate, just in case." "You still have faith in me, then?" Machiavelli shrugged. "You blundered. Once. Because fundamentally your instinct is to show mercy and trust. Those are good instincts. But now we must strike, and strike hard. Let's hope the Templars never know that you are still alive." "But they must already know." "Not necessarily. My spies tell me there was a lot of confusion." Ezio paused for thought. "Our enemies will know soon enough that I am alive, and very much so. How many do we fight?" "Oh, Ezio, the good news is that we have narrowed the field. We have wiped out many Templars across Italy, and across many of the lands beyond its boundaries. The bad news is that the Templars and the Borgia family are now one and the same thing, and they will fight like a cornered lion." "Tell me more." "We are too isolated here. We need to lose ourselves in the crowds in the centre of town. We will go to the bullfight." "The bullfight?" "Cesare excels as a bullfighter. After all, he is a Spaniard. In fact, he's not a Spaniard, but a Catalan. and that may one day prove to be to our advantage. How? The King and Queen of Spain want to unify their country. They're from Aragon and Castile. The Catalans are a thorn in their side, though they are still a powerful nation. Come, and be cautious. We must both use the skills of blending in that Paola taught you so long ago in Venice. I hope you have not forgotten them. Try me. They walked together through the half-ruined, once-imperial city, keeping to the shadows and slipping in and out of the crowds as fish hide in the rushes. At last they reached the bullring, where they took seats on the more expensive, crowded, shady side, and watched for an hour as Cesare and his many backup men dispatched 3 fearsome bulls. Ezio watched Cesare's fighting technique. He used the banderilleros and the picadors to break the animal down before delivering the coup de grace after a good deal of showing off. But there was no doubting his courage and prowess during the grim ritual of death, despite the fact that he had 4 junior matadors to support him. Ezio looked over his shoulder at the box of the Presidente of the fight. There he recognized the harsh but compellingly beautiful face of Cesare's sister Lucrezia. Was it his imagination, or had he seen her bite her lip until it bled? At any rate, he had learned something of how Cesare would behave in the field of battle, and how far he could be trusted in any kind of combat. Everywhere Borgia guards watched the throng, just as they did in the streets, all of them armed with those lethal-looking new guns. "Leonardo," he said, involuntarily, thinking of his old friend. Machiavelli looked at him. Leonardo was forced to work for Cesare on pain of death, and a most painful death it would have been. It's a detail, a terrible detail, but a detail nonetheless. The point is, his heart is not with his new master, who will never have the intelligence or the facility to control the apple fully. Or at least, I hope it isn't. We must be patient. We will get it back, and we will get Leonardo back with it. I wish I could be so sure. Machiavelli sighed. Perhaps you are wise to be doubtful, he said at last. Spain has taken over Italy, said Ezio. Valencia has taken over the Vatican, Machiavelli replied, but we can change that. We have allies in the College of Cardinals, some of whom are powerful. They aren't all lapdogs. And Cesare, for all his vaunting, depends on his father Rodrigo for funds. He gave Ezio a keen look. That is why you should have made sure of this interloping pope. I didn't know. I'm as much to blame as you are. I should have told you. But as you said yourself, it's the present we have to deal with, not the past. Amen to that. Amen. But how do they afford all this? Ezio asked, as another bull foundered and fell under Cesare's unerring and pitiless sword. Papa Alexander is a strange mixture, Machiavelli replied. He's a great administrator, and has even done the church some good, but the evil part of him always defeats the good. He was the Vatican's treasurer for years, and found ways of amassing money. The experience has stood him in good stead. He sells cardinals' hats, creating dozens of cardinals virtually guaranteed to be on his side. He has even pardoned murderers, provided they have enough money to buy their way off the gallows. How does he justify that? Very simple. He preaches that it is better for a sinner to live and repent than to die and forego such pain. Ezio couldn't help laughing, though his laugh was mirthless. His mind returned to the recent celebrations to mark the year 1500, the great year of the half-millennium. True, there had been flagellants roaming the country in expectation of the Last Judgment, and hadn't the mad monk Savonarola, who'd briefly had control of the apple, and whom he himself had defeated in Florence, not been duped by that superstition? 1500 had been a great jubilee year. Ezio remembered that thousands of hopeful pilgrims had made their way to the Holy See from all parts of the world. The year had even been celebrated in those small outposts across the far seas to the west, in the new lands discovered by Columbus and, a few years later, by Amerigo Vespucci, who had confirmed their existence. Money had flowed into Rome as the faithful bought indulgences to redeem themselves from their sins in anticipation of Christ returning to earth to judge the quick and the dead. It had also been the time when Cesare had set out to subjugate the city-states of the Romagna, and when the King of France had taken Milan, justifying his actions by claiming to be the rightful heir, the great-grandson of Gian Galeazzo Visconti. The Pope had then made his son, Cesare, Captain General of the Papal Forces and Gonfaloniere of the Holy Roman Church in a great ceremony on the morning of the 4th Sunday of Lent. Cesare was welcomed by boys in silk gowns and 4,000 soldiers wearing his personal livery. His triumph had seemed complete. The previous year, in May, he'd married Charlotte d'Albret, sister of John, King of Navarre, and King Louis of France, with whom the Borgia were allied, gave him the Dukedom of Valence. Having already been Cardinal of Valencia, no wonder the people gave him the nickname Valentino. Now this viper was at the peak of his power. How could Ezio ever defeat him? He shared these thoughts with Machiavelli. "In the end we will use their own vain glory to bring them down," said Niccolò. "They have an Achilles' heel. Everyone does. I know what yours is." "And that is?" snapped Ezio, needled. "I do not need to tell you her name." "Beware of her," rejoined Machiavelli, but then, changing the subject, he continued, "Remember the orgies." "They continue?" "Indeed they do. How Rodrigo, I refuse to call him Pope any more, loves them. And you've got to hand it to him. He's 70 years old." Machiavelli laughed wryly, then suddenly became more serious. "The Borgia will drown under the weight of their own self-indulgence." Ezio remembered the orgies well. He had been witness to one. There'd been a dinner given by the Pope in his Nero-like, over-decorated, gilded apartments, and attended by 50 of the best of the city's army of whores. Courtesans, they liked to call themselves, but whores for all that. When the eating, or should it be called feeding, was over, the girls danced with the servants who were in attendance. They were clothed at first, but later they shed their garments. The candelabra that had been on the tables was set down on the marble floor, and the nobler guests threw roasted chestnuts among them. The whores were then told to crawl about the floor on all fours, like cattle, buttocks high in the air, to collect the chestnuts. Then almost everyone had joined in. Ezio remembered with distaste how Rodrigo, together with Cesare and Lucrezia, had looked on. At the end, prizes were given: silk cloaks, fine leather boots, from Spain of course, mulberry and yellow velvet caps encrusted with diamonds, rings, bracelets, brocade pouches each containing 100 ducats, daggers, silver dildos, anything you could imagine, to those men who had had sex the most number of times with the crawling prostitutes. And the Borgia family, fondling each other, had been the principal judges. The two assassins left the bullfight and made themselves invisible in the crowds that thronged the early evening streets. "Follow me," Machiavelli said, an edge to his voice. Now you have had a chance to see your principal opponent at work, it would be well to purchase any equipment you are missing, and take care not to draw any undue attention to yourself. Do I ever? Ezio found himself once more needled by the younger man's remarks. Machiavelli wasn't the Brotherhood's leader. After Mario's death, no one was, and this interregnum would have to be concluded soon. In any case, I have my hidden blade. And the guards have their guns. These things Leonardo has created for them, you know his genius cannot control itself, are fast to reload, as you've seen, and moreover they have barrels filed in a cunning way on the inside to make the shot more accurate. I'll find Leonardo and talk to him. You may have to kill him. He's worth more to us alive than dead. You said yourself his heart wasn't with the Borgia. I said that is what I hope. Machiavelli stopped. Look, here is money. Grazie, said Ezio, taking the proffered pouch. While you are in my debt, listen to reason. As soon as I hear more reason from you, I shall. Ezio left his friend and made his way to the quarter of the armourers, where he provided himself with a new breastplate, steel cuffs, and a better balanced, higher quality sword and dagger than those he already possessed. Above all, he missed the old codex bracer, made of a secret metal, which had staved off so many blows that otherwise would have been fatal. But it was too late to regret that now. He'd just have to rely on his wits and his training. No one and no accident could take them from him. He returned to Machiavelli, who was waiting for him at an inn, their pre-appointed rendezvous. He found him in a prickly mood. Bene, said Machiavelli. Now you can survive the journey back to Firenze. Perhaps. But I'm not going back to Florence. No? Perhaps you should. It is where you belong. I have no home there any more. Machiavelli spread his hands. It's true that your old home has indeed been destroyed. I didn't want to tell you. But surely your mother and sister are safe there now. It is a city safe from the Borgia. My master, Piero Soderini, guards it well. You can recoup there. Ezio shuddered at having his worst fears confirmed. Then he pulled himself together and said, I stay here. You said yourself there will be no peace until we rise up against the entire Borgia family and the Templars who serve them. Such brave talk, and after Monteriggioni. That is cheap of you, Niccolo. How could I have known that they would find me so quickly, or that they would kill Mario? Machiavelli spoke earnestly, taking his companion by the shoulders. Look, Ezio, whatever happens, we must prepare ourselves carefully. We must not hit out in rash anger. We are fighting scorpioni, worse, serpents. They can coil around your neck and bite your balls in one movement. They know nothing of right and wrong, they only know their goal. Rodrigo surrounds himself with snakes and murderers. Even his daughter Lucrezia has been sharpened into one of his most artful weapons. She knows all there is to know about the art of poisoning. He paused. However, even she pales by comparison with Cesare. Him again. He is ambitious, ruthless, and cruel beyond, thank God, your imagination. The laws of men mean nothing to him. He has murdered his own brother, the Duke of Gandia, to claw his way towards absolute power. He will stop at nothing. I'll pluck him down. Only if you are not rash. He has the apple, don't forget. Heaven help us if he really learns its powers. Ezio's mind flashed nervously to Leonardo, who understood the apple all too well. He recognizes neither danger nor fatigue, Machiavelli continued. Those who do not fall by his sword clamour to join his ranks. Already the powerful Orsini and Colonna families have been brought down and made to kneel at his feet, and King Louis of France stands by his side. Machiavelli paused again, thoughtful. But at least King Louis will only remain his ally as long as he is useful to him. You overestimate the man. Machiavelli appeared not to have heard him. He was lost in his own thoughts. What does he intend to do with all that power and money? What drives the man? That I still do not know. But Ezio, he added, fixing his gaze on his friend, Cesare has set his sights on all Italia, and at this rate he will have it. Ezio hesitated, shocked. Is that admiration I hear in your voice? Machiavelli's face was set. He knows how to exercise his will, a rare virtue in the world today, and he is the kind of man who could make the world bend to that will. What do you mean exactly? Just this. People need someone to look up to adore even. It may be God or Christ, but better yet, someone you can really see, not just an image. Rodrigo, Cesare, even a great actor or singer, as long as they're dressed well and have faith in themselves. The rest follows quite logically. Machiavelli drank a little wine. It's part of us, you see. It doesn't interest you or me or Leonardo, but there are people out there who have a hunger to be followed, and they are the dangerous ones. He finished his drink. Fortunately, they can also be manipulated by people like me. Or destroyed by people like me. They sat in silence for a long moment. Who will lead the assassins now that Mario is dead? Asked Ezio. What a question. We are in disorder, and there are few candidates. It's important, of course, and the choice will be made in time. In the meantime, come on, we have work to do. Shall we take horses? Half of it may be falling down, but Rome's still a big city, suggested Ezio. Easier said than done. As Cesare's conquests in the Romagna increase, and he controls most of the region now, and the Borgia grow in power, they've taken the best areas of the city for themselves. We're in a Borgia Rione now. We won't get horses from the stables here. So the will of the Borgia is the only law here now. Ezio, what are you implying? That I approve of it? Don't play dumb with me, Niccolo. I don't play dumb with anyone. Do you have a plan? We'll improvise. They made their way towards the place where the local stables with horses for hire were located, walking down streets where, Ezio noticed, many of the shops that should have been open had their shutters down. What was the matter? Sure enough, the closer they got, the more numerous and menacing were the guards in mulberry and yellow livery. Machiavelli, Ezio noticed, was becoming increasingly nervous. It wasn't long before a burly sergeant at the head of a dozen or so tough-looking thugs in uniform blocked their path. "What's your business here, friend?" he said to Ezio. "Time to improvise?" whispered Machiavelli. "We want to hire some horses," Ezio replied evenly to the sergeant. The sergeant barked out a laugh. "Not here you won't, friend. On your way." He pointed back in the direction they'd come. "Isn't it allowed?" "No." "Why not?" The sergeant drew his sword as the other guards followed suit. He held the point of his blade against Ezio's neck and pushed slightly, so that a drop of blood appeared. "You know what curiosity did to the cat, don't you? Now fuck off. With an almost imperceptible movement, Ezio swept out his hidden blade, and with it severed the tendons of the wrist holding the sword, which clattered uselessly to the ground. With a great cry, the sergeant buckled over, grasping his wound. At the same time, Machiavelli leapt forward and slashed at the nearest 3 guards with his sword in a great sweeping motion. They all staggered back, astonished at the sudden boldness of the 2 men. Ezio swiftly withdrew the hidden blade, and in one fluid movement unsheathed his sword and dagger. His weapons were clear and poised just in time to cut down the first 2 of his attackers who, having recovered some of their composure, had stepped forward to avenge their sergeant. None of the Borgia men had the skill at arms required to take on either Ezio or Machiavelli. The assassin's training was of a wholly different class. Even so, the odds were against the 2 allies, who were heavily outnumbered. However, the unexpected ferocity of their attack was enough to give them an unassailable edge. Taken almost wholly by surprise, and unused to coming off worse in any encounter, the 12 men were soon dispatched. But the commotion of the scuffle had raised the alarm, and more Borgia soldiers were quick to come, over 24 men all told. Machiavelli and Ezio were nearly overwhelmed by the sheer weight of numbers, and with the effort of taking on so many at once. The flourishes of style that they were capable of were set aside for a quicker, more efficient form of swordsmanship, the 3-second kill, a single thrust sufficing. The 2 men stood their ground, grim determination set on their faces, and finally all their enemies had either fled or lay wounded, dead, or dying at their feet. "We'd better hurry," said Machiavelli, breathing hard. "Just because we've sent a few Borgia henchmen to their maker doesn't mean we'll get access to the stables. The ordinary people remain afraid. That's why so many of them won't even open their shops." "You're right," agreed Ezio. "We need to send them a signal. Wait here." A fire was burning in a brazier nearby. From it, Ezio seized a brand, then leapt up onto the wall of the stable, where the Borgia flag with the black bull in a golden field flew in the light breeze. Ezio set it on fire, and as it burned, 1 or 2 shop doors cautiously opened, as did the gates of the stables. "That's better," cried Ezio. He turned to address the small but doubtful crowd that had gathered. "Do not fear the Borgia. Do not be enthralled to them. Their days are numbered, and the hour of reckoning is at hand." More people came up, raising a cheer. "They'll be back," Machiavelli said. "Yes, they will. But we've shown these people that they are not the all-powerful tyrants they took them to be." Ezio leapt down from the wall into the stable yard, where Machiavelli joined him. Swiftly they picked 2 sturdy mounts and had them saddled. "We'll come back," Ezio promised the head ostler. "You might like to get this place cleaned up a bit now that it belongs to you again, as it rightfully should." "We will, my lord," said the man, but he still looked fearful. "Don't worry. They won't harm you now that you've seen them bested." "How do you figure that, my lord?" "They need you. They can't do without you. Just show them you won't be bullied and pushed around, and they'll have to cajole you into helping them." "They'll hang us, or worse." "Do you want to spend the rest of your lives under their yoke? Stand up to them. They'll have to listen to reasonable requests. Even tyrants can't function if enough people refuse to obey them." Machiavelli, already on his horse, took out a small black notebook and wrote in it, smiling absently to himself. Ezio swung himself into the saddle. "I thought you said we were in a hurry," said Ezio. "We are. I was just making a note of what you said." "I hope I should be flattered by that." "Oh yes, you should be. Come on." "You excel at opening wounds, Ezio," Machiavelli continued as they rode. "But can you also close them?" "I intend to heal the sickness that is at the heart of our society, not merely tinker about with the symptoms. Bold words. But you don't have to argue with me. We're on the same side, don't forget. I'm just putting across another point of view. Is this a test? Ezio was suspicious. If so, let us talk openly. I believe that Rodrigo Borgia's death would not have solved our problem. Really? Well, I mean, look at this city. Rome is the centre of Borgia and Templar rule. What I just said to that stableman holds true. Killing Rodrigo won't change things. Cut off the head of a man and he is dead, sure, but we are dealing with a hydra. I see what you mean. Like the seven-headed monster Hercules had to kill, and even then the heads grew back until he learned the trick of stopping that happening. Precisely. So, you suggest that we appeal to the people? Maybe. How else? Forgive me, Ezio, but the people are fickle. Relying on them is like building on sand. I disagree, Niccolo. Surely our belief in humanity is at the heart of the Assassin's Creed. And that's something you intend to put to the test? Ezio was about to reply, but at that instant a young thief ran alongside them and, with his knife, swiftly and surely cut through the leather strings that attached Ezio's money pouch to his belt. "What the—" Ezio shouted. Machiavelli laughed. "He must be from your inner circle. Look at him run. You might have trained him yourself. Go, get back what he's stolen. We need that money. I'll meet you at the Campidoglio on the Capitoline." Ezio wheeled his horse round and galloped off in pursuit of the thief. The man ran down alleys too narrow for the horse, and Ezio had to go round, worried that he might lose his quarry, but at the same time knowing, to his chagrin, that on foot the younger man would surely outrun him. It was almost as if the man had had some assassin training. But how could that be? At last he cornered the man in a blind alley and used the body of the horse to pin him up against the wall of the dead end. "Give it back," he said, evenly, drawing his sword. The man still seemed bent on escape, but when he saw how hopeless his situation was, his body slumped and, mutely, he raised the hand that held the pouch. Ezio snatched it back and stowed it away safely. But in doing so, he let his horse move back a fraction, and in the wink of an eye the man had scrambled up the wall with almost extraordinary speed, and disappeared over the other side. "Hey, come back! I haven't finished with you yet," Ezio yelled, but all he got in reply was the receding sound of running feet. Sighing and ignoring the small crowd that had gathered, he steered the horse in the direction of the Capitoline hill. Dusk was falling as he rejoined Machiavelli. "Did you liberate your money from our friend?" "I did. A small victory." "They add up," said Ezio. "And in time, with work, we'll have a few more. Let's hope we make it before Cesare's gaze falls on us and we are broken again. He damn nearly succeeded at Monteriggioni. Now let's get on with things." Machiavelli spurred on his horse. "Where are we going?" "To the Colosseum. We have a rendezvous with a contact of mine, Vinicio. And I'm expecting him to have something for me. Come on." As they rode through the city towards the Colosseum, Machiavelli commented dryly on the various new buildings that had been erected by Pope Alexander VI during his administration. "Look at all these facades masquerading as government buildings. Rodrigo is very clever in the way he keeps this place in business. It fools your friends, the people, quite easily." "When did you become so cynical?" Machiavelli smiled. "I'm not being cynical at all. I'm just describing Roma as she is today. But you're right, Ezio. Perhaps I am a little too bitter, a little too negative sometimes. all may not be lost. The good news is that we do have allies in the city. You will meet them. And the College of Cardinals is not completely under Rodrigo's thumb, much as he'd like it to be, although it is touch and go. What's touch and go? Our ultimate success. We can only try. Giving up is a sure way to failure. Who said anything about giving up? They rode on in silence until they reached the gloomy hulk of the ruined Colosseum, a building over which, for Ezio, the remembered horrors of the games that had taken place there 1,000 years ago still hung. His attention was immediately caught by a group of Borgia guards with a papal courier. Their swords drawn, halberds pointing threateningly and bearing flickering red torches, they were jostling a small, harassed-looking man. "Merda," said Machiavelli softly. "It's Vinicio. They've got to him first." Silently the two men slowed their horses, approaching the group quietly and with as much caution as possible in order to gain the greatest element of surprise. As they neared, they picked up snatches of conversation. "What you got there?" one guard was asking. "Nothing. Attempting to steal official Vatican correspondence, eh?" "Perdonatemi, signori. You must be mistaken." "No mistake, you little thief," said another guard, prodding the man with his halberd. "Who are you working for, ladro?" "No one." "Good. Then no one will care what happens to you." "I've heard enough," said Machiavelli. "We've got to save him and get the letter he carries." "Letter? Come on." Machiavelli dug his heels into his mount's flanks, and the surprised horse bolted forward as Machiavelli tugged hard on the reins. The beast reared, forelegs kicking wildly and slamming into the temple of the nearest Borgia guard, caving his helmet into his skull. The man fell like a stone. Meanwhile, Machiavelli had swiveled himself to his right, leaning low out of his saddle. Reaching down, he slashed viciously at the shoulder of the guard threatening Vinicio. The man dropped his halberd instantly and collapsed with the pain flaming through his shoulder. Ezio spurred his steed forward, careening past two other guards and using the pommel of his sword to strike fatally hard down on the first man's head and slapping the second across the eyes with the flat of his blade. One more guard was left. Distracted by the sudden attack, he didn't notice Vinicio grabbing the shaft of his halberd and suddenly felt himself yanked forward. Vinicio's dagger was waiting and pierced the man's throat. He fell with a sickening gargling sound as blood flooded his lungs. Once again, the element of surprise gave the assassins the edge. The Borgia soldiers were clearly not used to such effective resistance to their bullying. Vinicio wasted no time and gestured to the main thoroughfare leading from the central plaza. A horse could be seen clattering away from the plaza, the courier standing hard in the stirrups, urging on his steed. "Give me the letter. Be quick about it," ordered Machiavelli. "But I haven't got it. He has," Vinicio cried, pointing towards the fleeing horse. "They took it from me." "Get after him," Machiavelli shouted to Ezio. "Whatever it costs, get that letter and bring it to me at the Terme de Diocleziano by midnight. I'll be waiting." Ezio rode off in pursuit. It was easier than catching the thief had been. Ezio's horse was better than the courier's, and the man he was pursuing was no fighter. Ezio pulled him from the horse with ease. He didn't like to kill the man, but he couldn't afford to let him go and raise the alarm. "Requiescat in pace," he said softly as he slit his throat. He put the letter, unopened, in his belt pouch and made a tow rope from the horse's bridle so he could take the courier's steed with him. He then turned his own mount and made for the ruins of the Baths of Diocletian. It was now almost pitch dark, except for where the occasional torch guttered in a wall-mounted sconce. To reach the Baths, Ezio had to cross a sizable stretch of wasteland, and halfway across his horse reared and neighed in fear. The other horse followed suit, and Ezio had his hands full calming them. Suddenly, a blood-curdling sound came to his ears, like the howling of wolves, and yet not quite the same. Possibly worse. It sounded more like human voices imitating the animals. He spun his horse round in the dark, loosening the tow rope he'd made. Once free, the courier's horse turned tail and galloped off into the night. Ezio hoped it would find its way home in one piece. He didn't have much time to reflect on that as he reached the deserted baths. Machiavelli had not yet arrived. No doubt he was off again on one of his mysterious private missions in the city. But then... From among the hillocks and tussocks of grass that had grown over the remains of the ancient Roman city, figures appeared and surrounded him. Feral-looking people who were hardly human in appearance at all. They stood upright, but they had long ears, snouts, claws, and tails, and they were covered in rough grey hair. Their eyes seemed to glint red. Ezio drew a sharp breath. What on earth were these devilish creatures? His eyes darted around the ruins. He was encircled by at least a dozen of these wolf-men. Ezio unsheathed his sword once more. This was not turning out to be the best of days. With wolf-like snarls and howls, the creatures fell upon him. As they came close, Ezio could see that these were indeed men like him, only seemingly mad, like creatures in some kind of holy trance. Their weapons were long, sharp steel talons sewn firmly into the tips of heavy gloves, and with these they slashed at his legs and at the horse's flanks, trying to bring him down. He was able to keep them at bay with his sword, and as their disguises seemed to have no chainmail or other protection under the wolfskins, he was able to wound them with the keen edge of his sword. He cut one creature's arm off at the elbow, and it slunk away, wailing horribly in the darkness. The strange creatures seemed to be more aggressive than skillful, and their weapons were no match for the point of Ezio's flashing blade. He quickly pressed forward, splitting the skull of another, and pierced the left eye of a third. Both wolfmen fell on the spot, mortally injured by Ezio's blows. By then the other wolfmen seemed to be having second thoughts about continuing their attack, melting into the darkness, or into hollows and caves formed by the overgrown ruins surrounding the baths. Ezio gave chase, gouging the thigh of one of his would-be assailants, while another fell under the hooves of his horse, only to have his back broken. Overtaking a sixth, Ezio leant down and, turning backwards, ripped the man's stomach open so that his guts spilled onto the ground, and he stumbled over them as he fell and died. Finally, all was silent. Ezio calmed his horse and stood up in his stirrups, willing his eyes to penetrate the darkness and his ears to pick up signals his eyes could not see. Presently he thought he could make out the sound of laboured breathing not far off, though nothing was visible. He urged his horse into a walk, and softly made his way in the direction it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the blackness of a shallow cave, formed by the overhang of a fallen archway, and festooned with creepers and weeds. Dismounting and tying his horse firmly to a tree stump, he rubbed the blade of his sword with dirt, so that it would not glint and give his location away, and gingerly made his way forward. For a brief second, he thought he saw the flickering of a flame in the bowels of the cave. As he inched forward, bats swooped over his head and out into the night. The place stank of their droppings. Unseen insects and doubtless other creatures clattered and scuttled away from him. He cursed them for the noise they made, as it seemed as loud as thunder to him, but the ambush, if there was one, still did not come. Then he saw the flame again, and heard what he could have sworn was a faint whimpering. He saw that the cave was less shallow than the fallen arch suggested, and that its corridor curved gently, and at the same time narrowed, leading into a deeper darkness. As he followed the curve, the flickers of flame he had glimpsed earlier resolved themselves into a small fire, in the light of which he could make out a hunched figure. The air was slightly fresher here. There must be some airway in the roof which he could not see. That would be why the fire could breathe. Ezio stood stock still and watched. Whimpering, the creature reached out a skinny left hand, grubby and bony, and plucked at the end of an iron bar, which was stuck in the fire. Its other end was red hot, and tremblingly the creature drew it out, and, bracing itself, applied the end to the bloody stump of its other arm, stifling a shriek as it did so, in an attempt to cauterize the wound. It was the wolfman Ezio had maimed. In the moment when the wolfman's attention was bound up in his pain and the job in hand, Ezio surged forward. He was almost too late, for the creature was fast and nearly got away, but Ezio's fist closed hard around its good arm. It was difficult, for the limb was slippery with grease, and the stench the creature released as it moved was all but overpowering, but Ezio held on firmly. Catching his breath and kicking the iron bar away, Ezio said, "What the fuck are you?" "Ugh," was all the reply he got. Ezio slapped the man hard round the head with his other fist, which was still sheathed in a mailed glove. Blood spurted close to the man's left eye, and he moaned in pain. "What are you? Speak!" "Ugh." His open mouth displayed a broken, greyish set of teeth, and the smell that came from it made that of a drunken whore seem sweet. "Speak!" Ezio drove the point of his sword into the stump and twisted it. He hadn't time to mess about with this wreck of a person. He was worried about his horse. "Ah!" Another cry of pain, then a rough, almost incomprehensible voice emerged from the inarticulate grunting, speaking good Italian. "I am a follower of the Secta Luporum." The sect of the wolves? What the hell is that? "You will find out what you did tonight." Oh, shut up. Tightening his grip, Ezio stirred up the fire to gain more light and glanced around. Now he saw that he was in a kind of domed chamber, possibly hollowed out deliberately. There was little in it but a couple of chairs and a rough table with a handful of papers on it, weighted down with a stone. "My brothers will return soon, and then—" Ezio dragged him to the table, pointing with his sword at the papers. "And these? What are these?" The man looked at him and spat. Ezio placed his sword point close to the bloody stump again. "No!" wailed the man. "Not again!" "Then tell me." Ezio looked at the papers. The moment would come when he would have to put his sword down, however briefly, to pick them up. Some of the writing was in Italian, some in Latin, but there were other symbols which looked like writing but which he could not decipher. Then he heard a rustling coming from the direction he had come. The wolfman's eyes gleamed. "Our secrets," he said. At the same moment, 2 or more of the creatures bounded into the room, roaring and clawing at the air with their steel claws. Ezio's prisoner wrenched himself free and would have joined them if Ezio had not slashed his head from his shoulders and sent it rolling towards his friends. He tore round to the other side of the table, seizing the papers and hurling the table over towards his enemies. The firelight dimmed. The fire needed stirring again, either that or more fuel. Ezio's eyes strained to pick out the two remaining wolfmen. They were like grey shadows in the room. Ezio dropped back into the darkness, stashed the papers in his tunic, and waited. The wolfmen may have had the strength of the insane, but they couldn't have been very skilled, except in the art, perhaps, of scaring people to death. They certainly couldn't keep quiet or move silently. Using his ears more than his eyes, Ezio managed to circle them, skirting the walls until he knew he was behind them, while they thought he was still somewhere in the darkness ahead of them. There was no time to lose. He sheathed his sword, unleashed his hidden blade, came up, silent as a real wolf, behind one of them, and holding him firmly from behind, cut his throat. He died instantly and silently, and Ezio eased the body quietly to the floor. He considered trying to capture the other, but there was no time for interrogation. There might be more of them, and Ezio wasn't sure he had enough strength to fight anymore. Ezio could sense the other man's panic, which was confirmed when he left off his impersonation and called anxiously into the silent darkness, "Sandro?" It was a simple matter then to locate him, and again the exposed throat was Ezio's hoped-for target. This time, however, the man spun round, frantically tearing at the air in front of him with his claws. He could see Ezio, but Ezio remembered that these creatures wore no mail under their fancy dress. He withdrew the hidden blade, and with his larger and less subtle dagger, which had the advantage of a serrated edge, opened the man's breast. The exposed heart and lungs glistened in the dying firelight as the last wolfman fell forward, his face in the fire. A smell of burning hair and flesh threatened to overcome Ezio. But he sprang back and made his way as fast as he could, fighting down panic, to the kindly night air outside. Once outside, he saw that the wolfmen hadn't touched his horse. Perhaps they had been too sure of trapping him to bother to kill it or drive it away. He untied it and realized he was trembling too much to mount. Instead, he took its bridle and led it back to the baths of Diocletian. Machiavelli had better be there, and he had better be well armed. By God, if only he still had his codex gun, or one of those things Leonardo had fashioned for his new master. At least Ezio had the satisfaction of knowing he could still win fights by using his wits and his training. Two things they couldn't deprive him of until the day they caught him and tortured him to death. He remained fully alert on the short journey back to the baths, and found himself occasionally starting at shadows, something that would not have happened to him as a younger man. The thought of a safe arrival brought him no comfort. What if there were another ambush awaiting him there? And what if these creatures had surprised Machiavelli? Was Machiavelli himself aware of the Secta Luporum? Where were Machiavelli's loyalties anyway? He reached the dim, vast ruin, a memorial to the lost age when Italy had ruled the world, in safety. There was no sign of life that he could see, but then Machiavelli himself emerged from behind an olive tree and greeted him soberly. "What kept you?" "I was here before you, but then I was distracted." Ezio looked at his colleague evenly. "What do you mean?" "Some jokers in fancy dress. Sound familiar?" Machiavelli's gaze was keen. "Dressed as wolves? Oh, so you do know about them?" "Yes." "Then why suggest here as a meeting place?" "Are you suggesting that I— What else am I to think?" "Dear Ezio." Machiavelli took a step forward. "I assure you, by the sanctity of our creed, that I had no idea they would be here." He paused. "But you are right. I sought a meeting place remote from men, little realizing that they too might choose such a place. Unless they'd been tipped off." "If you are impugning my honor—" Ezio made an impatient gesture. "Oh, forget it," he said. "We've enough to do without quarrelling with each other." In truth, Ezio knew that for the moment he would have to trust Machiavelli. And so far he had had no reason not to. He would play his cards closer to his chest in future, though. Who are they? What are they? The sect of the wolves. Sometimes they call themselves the followers of Romulus. Shouldn't we move away from here? I managed to grab some papers of theirs, and they might be back to collect them. First, tell me if you got the letter back, and tell me quickly what else has happened to you. You look as if you've been in the wars, said Machiavelli. After Ezio had done so, his friend smiled. I doubt that they will return tonight. We are 2 trained armed men, and it sounds as if you well and truly thrashed them. But that in itself will have incensed Cesare. You see, although there is little proof as yet, we believe that these creatures are in the Borgia's employ. They are a band of false pagans who have been terrorizing the city for months. To what purpose? Machiavelli spread his hands. Political? Propaganda? The idea is that people will be encouraged to throw themselves under the protection of the papacy, and in return a certain loyalty is exacted from them. How convenient. But even so, shouldn't we be getting out of here now? Ezio felt suddenly and unsurprisingly tired. His very soul ached. They won't be back tonight. No disparagement to your prowess, Ezio, but the Wolfmen aren't fighters or even killers. The Borgia use them as trusted go-betweens, but their main job is to frighten. They are poor, deluded souls whom the Borgia have brainwashed into working for them. They believe their new masters will help them rebuild ancient Rome from its very beginnings. The founders of Rome were Romulus and Remus, and they were suckled as babies by a she-wolf. I remember the legend. For the Wolfmen, poor creatures, it is no legend. But they are a dangerous enough tool in the Borgia's hands. He paused briefly. Now, the letter. And those papers you say you grabbed from the Wolfman's lair. Well done, by the way. If they're of any use. We'll see. Give me the letter. Here it is. Hastily Machiavelli broke the seal on the parchment. Cazzo, he muttered. It's encrypted. What do you mean? This one was supposed to be in plain text. Benicio was one of my moles among the Borgia. He told me he had it on good authority. The fool! They're transmitting information in code. Without their code sheet, we have nothing. Perhaps the papers I got hold of will help. Machiavelli smiled. By heaven, Ezio, sometimes I thank God we're on the same side. Let's have a look. Quickly he sifted through the pages Ezio had seized, and his troubled face cleared. Any good? I think, perhaps. He read on, his brow furrowed once more. Yes, by God, yes! I think we have it! He clapped Ezio on the shoulder and laughed. Ezio laughed too. You see, sometimes logic is not the only way to win a war. Luck can play a part too. Andiamo. You said we had allies in the city. Come on, bring me to them. Follow me.